We welcome you into Sideline to Sideline, another edition. Cameron Brock, Matthew Postins, Derek Duke, and I'm Pete Mundo as we get you set for week 3 and look back on a week 2. Obviously, the storyline everybody's talking about, guys, national media, is Baker Mayfield planting the flag at midfield in the horseshoe. So the question I'll pose to each and every one of you, fun or too far? Cam, we'll start with you.
I think it's too far, and here's the main reason why. First off, I think it is a bit disrespectful. I get the whole, it's fun, it's emotional kind of thing. But if they meet Ohio State in the college football playoff, Ohio State is going to use that as a motivating factor, and I guarantee you Ohio State beats Oklahoma because they have that chip on their shoulder now.
Now, hold on there, though, Cam. Shouldn't Ohio State be motivated enough by being in the college football playoff that having some guy plant the flag at midfield, you shouldn't need more motivation if you're in the college football playoff?
You shouldn't, but it's going to be there. Trust me, that picture's going to be in every single locker.
All right, fair. Matthew, fire away.
I thought it was fun. I enjoyed it. I could see why Ohio State fans are unhappy about it. I was covering a Cowboys 49ers game, I think back in 2000, and that was the game where Terrell Owens scored the touchdown all the way to the star at the 50-yard line and threw the football down. Being a Cowboys fan, I wasn't terribly happy with that at the time. But, not being an Ohio State or an Oklahoma fan, I just thought it was fun. I mean, college football is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be exciting. I get why Baker Mayfield and his teammates were excited. I doubt they were thinking 4 months down the road, Cameron, to a potential matchup in the college football playoff. Perhaps if they were, he might not have done that, but I enjoyed it.
Now, let's be honest. If JT Barrett keeps playing like that, they're not touching a college football playoff. Derek, when you saw that, shocked, surprised, fun, disrespectful, what was the takeaway for you?
I absolutely loved it, guys. I thought it was just glorious to watch from my couch on the television. Could you think of anybody else more perfect in the Big 12 to plant that flag than Baker Mayfield, who, obviously everybody hates that's not in Oklahoma, of course. So I absolutely loved it. If you're Ohio State, I mean, if you don't want that to potentially happen, take care of the business on the field and actually win the football game. I had no issue with it whatsoever, and I thought it was pretty funny myself.
Derek, we'll stick with you and then come back around. What that win for the Big 12 and for Oklahoma, how big was it from a branding and perception standpoint, not just for OU, but for the entire conference?
Oh, it was huge. I mean, anytime a team from the Big 12 knocks out a conference title favorite in the preseason like Ohio State, I think that is a very, very big deal. Ohio State was predicted to win the Big 12 by a pretty large margin for the most part, and for a Big 12 team to go on the road and take them out early by that many points, by double digits, I thought was outstanding, and I think Texas will have their shot this coming weekend.
And Matthew, I really thought that this win for Oklahoma, it's by far the best win, I think, in college football. I know we're 2 weeks in, but I think this is better than Alabama beating Florida State because it's not a neutral site. It was a true road game. I think it's the best win in the sport by far through a couple weeks.
I think so, too. And I think when you look at their resume, should they get to a point where they're being considered for the college football playoff, the committee is going to look at that victory very favorably. To me, you go on the road, you beat a top 5 team, that's going to be a feather in your cap. And it was a big weekend for the Big 12, not only from that standpoint, but also from the fact that when you look at the ACC now, which is a conference that I think all of us agreed Florida State was probably going to come out of and go to the playoff, that conference now looks a lot more balanced and a lot more even. And I could easily see a team coming out of the ACC as a champion with 2 losses. Louisville plays Clemson this weekend. It could be one of those situations where the ACC ends up like the Big 12 this year, where everybody beats up on one another, and you could end up having an ACC versus Big 12 argument when it comes to one of those spots in the college football playoff.
And Cam, you got to admit that at this point, every Big 12 fan has got to be an Ohio State fan for the rest of the season, do they not?
Well, let's not go that far yet. Obviously, it's a huge win for Oklahoma, and Oklahoma fans certainly want Ohio State to continue winning. But there are so many teams in the Big 12 facing other Power 5 conference schools. It's I mean, this week is bigger than last week. If you look at the schedule, there are 4-5 huge games. If you want to count Baylor, Duke, I don't think it's going to be that big for the Big 12 regardless. But, I mean, USC, Texas Tech, Arizona State. You got to have your bottom and your middle tiers compete if you want to be in the college football playoff. And for Oklahoma, again, huge victory. Pat 40 has them above Alabama right now.
That's all right. 40, we saw him down at Big 12 Media Days, Matthew. I'm a big 40 guy. Even I think that's a bit of a stretch, but I give him credit for it. Matthew, you were at the other big game this weekend, TCU, Arkansas in Fayetteville. Huge win for the Horned Frogs. What was that atmosphere like? And after the game, Gary Patterson and the players, did they realize that this is a huge win, not just for them, but for the conference as well?
Well, I think, first of all, game day in Fayetteville is pretty awesome. I mean, it was pretty much sold out Saturday. That crowd, at least for the first half, was in the football game, at least until TCU kind of put the vice grip on them in the second half. We talked about their defense last week, and their defense was awesome. I mean, especially their run defense. They made Arkansas incredibly one-dimensional to the point where Austin Allen really couldn't get much done at quarterback in the second half. And afterward, Gary Patterson wasn't buying the whole Big 12 versus SEC narrative, but Cameron made a good point about how your mid-tier teams in your conference had to take care of business. As big as the Oklahoma win was, this was a big win for TCU in the conference as well, because they went into an SEC environment, won that game, beat a team that'll probably end up being a bowl team, and that's going to bolster their strength of schedule or strength of victory, whatever you want to call it, within the conference. After the game, Gary and the players were pretty subdued. I mean, they said they celebrated, but it really didn't look like they did. Gary Patterson's looking at this as a concentrated 4-week season. They had SMU this week, a team that they sometimes struggle with from a rivalry standpoint, and then they have the road trip to Oklahoma State after that. He's focused on just these 4 games right here and winning these 4 games and then getting to their bye week. That's where his focus is right now. They're happy to be 2-0, but I think they feel like they have the defense to compete with anybody in the conference, but their offense has to come along a little bit.
Derek, when you watch that TCU game over the weekend and you see how good that defense is, the running game, how have your expectations changed for TCU from preseason to where we are 2 weeks in?
I had them about 5th, I think 4th or 5th in the conference in my preseason poll. I think they have a better defense than what I thought they were going to have this year. I thought they played outstanding on Saturday, just shutting down the Razorback offense. And their run game really got going, which probably impressed me the most because last season they kind of struggled a bit on the offensive line up front. And Chris Thompson, the new offensive line coach from Arizona State, came in. He brought a real physical mentality up front to those guys. And I thought they did an outstanding job for the most part. But my biggest question I'm going to have is Kenny Hill. They didn't really let it necessarily cut him loose to make all those big throws that you would like to see in the offense. So that's going to be something to kind of keep an eye on going forward for me.
Let's spin it ahead, guys, to this coming week. Cameron, you mentioned the huge Power 5 games this week. There's not that marquee top 5 matchup, but you mentioned the respectability the conference can get with some of these mid-tier teams or even lower-tier teams beating some mid to lower tier teams in the other Power 5s. So which one of these games are you most intrigued by that we're maybe the national average college football fans overlooking?
Oh, that is a terrific question. I'm really quite intrigued by all of them, but I'm going to go with Baylor and Duke. And
really? I did not see that coming.
Duke has that victory over Northwestern, but Baylor, we're seeing a new quarterback, and we're going to see exactly where he is. And this is more about how Baylor's coming along than it is the actual matchup. And they're going to start a guy for the first time on the road in Durham, North Carolina. Now, Durham isn't exactly the most hostile place in the world when it comes to football. Now, change sports, and that's a different story. But I think this is a big time for Baylor. I think we know that USC is probably a lot better than Texas right now. Texas Tech and Arizona State. Texas Tech really needs to win that game. Arizona State is so bad right now, and they're starting they're starting a freshman. A freshman has taken over one of the starting spots for Arizona State on the offensive line. And then Oklahoma State, if they don't dispatch Pitt, the Big 12 is going to look really bad. And then you got Kansas State and Vanderbilt, and they haven't played anybody yet.
Yeah, that's a good point. I totally forgot. You mentioned all 5 of those, I guess, we've got coming up this weekend. Matthew, when you look at what Baylor has done, they're going from Anu Solomon to Zach Smith, who, the team knows him. The guys know him from last year. He was in a tough spot as a freshman last year. This is a really difficult spot, but to me, the move makes sense because of how bad Baylor can be. What's the point in putting in the senior quarterback? Just ride out with the sophomore and see what we got.
Yeah, I mean, if they're winning games, then it makes sense to keep Solomon in there because he's probably part of the reason why they're winning.
Mm-hmm.
Smith got about 160, 170 passing attempts last year, and like you said, a very difficult situation coming off the bench and replacing Seth Russell, who got hurt again last year. The time is now for them to figure out if Smith can be a guy who can be their quarterback for the next couple of years, or they're going to have to look for that guy in the recruiting space once they get into the offseason. Baylor went from, in my mind, a borderline bowl team to a team that probably won't make a bowl team this year just because of the way they're playing right now. But I want to go back to that Texas Tech game for just a minute. I think that's a huge game for Tech because when I looked at my phone last year when they played each other, I was like, wow, Tech scored 58 points in that game, and they lost. And I saw Arizona State twice last year in person. Not a good football team right now. I'm not sure what's going on out in Tempe, but they're not a good football team right now. That's a game Texas Tech has to win, not necessarily for the Big 12, but for themselves to get some confidence as they get closer to Big 12 play.
Derek, the Kansas State game, Vanderbilt game is one you're going to be taking a closer look at as we go throughout the week. So that game for Bill Snyder, we got a little bulletin board material today from Vanderbilt safety, and I just think that this is the SEC West or the SEC East to me is not very good top to bottom, but I think all these teams are kind of somewhere in the middle. So I don't think Vanderbilt's as bad as they were, say, 3 years ago. I think Darren Mason is doing a better job. But should that be viewed as a bit of a trap game for Kansas State fans?
I don't really think so. I think Bill Snyder and the Wildcats are taking this game very, very seriously. This is the first Power 5 opponent that they're going to play this year. And it's going to be on the road in Nashville. It's going to be a crazy environment over there at Vanderbilt. I really think that the Wildcats will have their be really prepared this year for this game. I think they have been kind of waiting on this game. The first 2 weeks for them were kind of just, a snooze for them. So this is going to be a very interesting game, in my opinion. It's going to be, like I said before, it's going to be some big boy football. All eyes are going to be on the trenches, and you better buckle up your chin strap for this one because it's going to be a hard smash mouth football game.
It's the most important game in the Big 12 this week, and it's simply because of perception and marketing and just publicity in general because it is on the road against an SEC East team.
But, guys, let me ask you, who have any of you been to Nashville?
I've been to Nashville plenty of times, but I actually have not been to a Vanderbilt game.
But you've been to Nashville, like the city. All right. That's a fun city.
Yeah.
I mean, you can get in, I hope the K-State players aren't having too much fun Friday night because you get down to Broadway, the music's flowing, the drinks are flowing, and things can get out of hand pretty quickly. Yeah,
hopefully they got a handle on the curfew and then keep them out of Tootsie's.
Yeah, I know. I've been to Tootsie's too late that I don't want to even talk about it. It's a good time over there. That whole SEC Big 12 thing, first off, it's a good chance to plug our T-shirts, which are doing all right. They're doing pretty well. The overrated with the SEC logo as the O. I thought it was pretty creative, and they're starting to pick up a little steam, so we'll see how those go. Hopefully K-State fans will jump on those. But the whole Big 12 SEC thing, they got the win last week, Cam. This week, of course, they're playing Vanderbilt. But you know what the SEC fan is going to say? They're going to say, well, those are two bottom feeders anyway, so why does it matter?
Yeah, the SEC, they have some great public relations programs over there, don't they? The SEC fans going to do whatever they can to defend their program because really, in the scheme of it all, that's all they really have over there is college football. They don't have any academics except at Vanderbilt. They don't really have any professional teams unless you go to Tampa, which is kind of more ACC territory in my opinion.
Yeah.
Or Nashville. I mean, really, Nashville's the only place that has anything.
Let's get to this Texas USC game. And Derek, it seems like Tom Herman always gets amped up. His guys amped up. Whether when he was at Houston, the Oklahoma game, the Louisville game, his guys always get jacked up for these games. But I don't know if this Texas group is that group that's going to be able to do that and pull off an upset against a USC team that looked much better in week 2 than week 1. So how do you think Tom Herman's going to play this thing this week?
Hopefully he's going to run the football for the Texas sake. Like I said before, USC was giving up, I think, 216 yards on the ground against Western Michigan and then now last week against Stanford. So if he starts running the football, I think this could be a lot closer game than what people think. If they have enough talent to pull it off, I think they do. But I don't think they will. It's going to be very interesting this week to see who's going to roll out for them to be the starting quarterback. Is it going to be Sam Ehlinger? Is it going to be Shane Buechele? But to me, if they can run the football and play well on defense, that's going to be the key in this game for the Longhorns.
Matthew, you're in Dallas-Fort Worth, the Iron Skillets this weekend. It's kind of a weird game for TCU because it's between Arkansas and Oklahoma State, these two massive games like you talked about earlier. Can this at all be a trap game because it's Chad Morris's Super Bowl essentially? He can raise his coaching profile nationally with a win like, say, Tom Herman did last year. Do you see this as a potential trap game, or is TCU just too good, they'll take care of business?
I absolutely see this as a trap game, and so does Gary Patterson. And I think this is part of the reason why the players weren't celebrating out of their minds when they beat Arkansas on Saturday. Halfway through the press conference after the game, Gary Patterson mentioned 2005. So in 2005, TCU joined the Mountain West Conference. Their first game was against Oklahoma on the road. They went to Norman, and they beat Oklahoma. The next week, they came back, played SMU, and lost. It was the only game they lost that season. And you could make a case, probably a very flimsy one, that had they beaten SMU, they might have been in the BCS conversation that year. So that was an opportunity lost for them. And he couldn't wait to mention that after the game. Everybody was talking about how this validates the Big 12. And he's like, hey, we got SMU next week. And back in 2005, they screwed up our whole world the week after we beat Oklahoma. And that was a huge win for us. So I think that's part of the reason why they're so subdued in Fort Worth this week. To them, they know the Oklahoma State game is a big game because it's their opener and it's on the road, but they got to get through SMU first. And he's using those lessons from 2005 and he's imparting them on this team in 2017.
Yeah, I'm with you there. It's going to be I just think it's going to be tricky for them on that one on Saturday. Now let's go around. I'll start. Which game in the Big 12 you're most intrigued by before we wrap things up? For me, it's Oklahoma State at Pittsburgh for the simple reason that with how badly Penn State beat up Pittsburgh last week, I think that Oklahoma State has to go in there and essentially have the same type of 20, 25-point victory where it's easily rolling over Pittsburgh, and it's just not even close, because if it's not, it's going to be another excuse to say, well, a top team in the Big 12 is not all that good because look what Penn State did to them, and Oklahoma State had a close game or whatever it might be. So I think it's imperative that Oklahoma State goes out there and just steamrolls Pittsburgh this weekend in the noon kickoff. Cameron, fire away.
Well, I said it earlier, it's Baylor and Duke, and for the simple reason we'll get to see how far Zach Smith is along with that offense and what the future holds for Baylor. And what if they do go to Durham and upset Duke? How huge would that be for the Big 12?
That would be pretty good. It would be after what Duke did to Northwestern last week. Matthew, most intriguing game for you this weekend in the Big 12?
Well, I'll take two, but they're not the games you're expecting. Kansas at Ohio and Iowa State at Akron. You talk about the mid-tier and the lower-tier teams needing to take care of business. Okay. Both of these teams are coming off losses to teams that I feel like they should have beaten. Iowa State should have beaten Iowa. There's really no reason why they shouldn't have, except they just weren't able to close the deal. Kansas lost a game by about 20 points that I felt like they had a good chance of winning. These are both MAC teams. Ohio's usually a very good team in the Mid-American Conference. Akron's got some talent. Those two teams cannot afford to lose those games, A, from a profile of the conference standpoint, and B, from the standpoint of trying to get both of those programs back to a bowl game.
I love those choices. Great wild cards. Derek, which one are you looking at here as your most intriguing game of the weekend in the Big 12?
I think it's got to be Texas at USC for me. I am just absolutely excited to go ahead and watch that game on Saturday and see how it all unfolds for Tom Herman. It's going to be very interesting. You know, Texas came out flat against Maryland in week 1. They obviously had a bounce-back win against San Jose State, shutting them out 56-0. I want to know how that defense is going to play against Sam Darnold and USC. I want to see how a Tom Herman team goes out on the road and how they perform. And do they have what it takes to pull off the upset? And if they do, it's going to be very, very big for the Big 12 Conference and definitely give us something to talk about on Sunday.
Well, it's a full slate this week, guys. 10 games on the schedule before conference play starts next week. So it should be pretty fun stuff. For Derek Duke, Matthew Postins, Cameron Brock, I'm Pete Mundo. You've been listening and watching to Sideline, brought to you by HeartlandCollegeSports.com.